Hi guys, Miss Davis here, back for day 12 of the Anne Frank series. It's been a dozen days that we've been together already. So I do want to skip forward one journal entry from where we left off yesterday. The collection of entries I have for today really kind of focus on the further fallouts and the further effects of a country at war in a time when a country is at crisis and how that really affects different people in different ways, even people in hiding. So again, the implications are interesting for such a time as we are all sort of in lockdown ourselves. And yes, we talked about yesterday things that are sort of everyday things being harder to handle and more difficult to think our way around. And here today, as the crisis sort of ramps up, it starts to grate at the nerves and make everybody a little bit more nervous. And the worse things get outside, the worse things seem to be in our smaller family units. So that's really kind of reflected in these journal entries too, as the war is really ramping up. It's the summer of 1943, and you'll see the war sort of like omnipresent in these particular journal entries. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into Friday, July 16th, 1943. Dear Kitty, burglars again, but real this time. This morning Peter went to the warehouse at 7 o'clock as usual, and at once noticed that both the warehouse door and the door opening onto the street were ajar. He told Pym, who tuned the radio in the private office to Germany, and locked the door. Then they went upstairs together. The standing orders for such times were observed as usual. No taps to be turned on, therefore no washing. Silence. Everything to be finished by 8 o'clock, and no laboratory. We were all very glad that we had slept so well and had not heard anything. Not until 11:30 did we learn from Mr. Kufius that the burglars had pushed in the outer door with a crowbar and had forced the warehouse door. However, they did not find much to steal, so they tried their luck upstairs. They stole 2 cash boxes containing 40 florins, postal orders and checkbooks, and then, worst of all the coupons for 150 kilos of sugar. Mr. Kufius thinks that they belong to the same gang as the ones who tried all 3 doors 6 weeks ago. They were unsuccessful then. It has caused rather a stir in the building, but the secret annex can't seem to go on without sensations like this. We were very glad that the typewriters and money in our wardrobe, where they were brought upstairs every evening, were safe. Yours, Anne. So again, criminal activity seems like it would be disassociated from the war, but I don't really think that it is. I think that the criminal activity has everything to do with the chaotic environment outside. One, people left to their own devices, finding trouble. Maybe one cause. Another cause may be that maybe they're stealing because they're hungry and without resources themselves and are in a desperate situation. So it's hard to know what the reasons the thieves were there for, but their presence does mean that it affects the people in hiding and the people who are not responsible for the criminal activity. So there's one way that the war it's pressing in on them, even in the secret annex. Next journal entry is Monday, July 19th, 1943. Dear Kitty, North Amsterdam was very heavily bombed on Sunday. The destruction seems to be terrible. Whole streets lie in ruins, and it will take a long time before all the people are dug out. Up till now, there are 200 dead and countless wounded. The hospitals are crammed. You hear of children lost in the smoldering ruins looking for their parents. I shudder when I recall the dull droning rumble in the distance, which for us marked the approaching destruction. Yours, Anne. Okay, so here's what this has got me to thinking now. I have experienced, things where, there was massive destruction, and I was old enough to remember what 9/11 felt like. I was in my early 20s, and that time my daughter had just been born. I was in a classroom, actually in a health classroom, the day 9/11 happened, and we sort of watched as a horror-struck group those 2 towers fall, and thinking of people wandering around in the rubble looking for their loved ones, all the ash, all the smoke. For buildings to fall in a city is no small measure. So everything is going on around, and then an act of destruction. It does remind you we're very lucky that things are quiet now, and that there's been no large acts of mass destruction, terrorist threats, or an earthquake or something. I know Tennessee schools are going through this whole coronavirus shutdown, and just before the coronavirus, they had been flooded, and so they've got a natural disaster and the COVID-19 outbreak. So And again, watching this from a safe distance, it's hard to think about people in that kind of um, pain. And so it doesn't make me think of that. The next entry is July 23rd, 1943. Dear Kitty, just for fun, I'm going to tell you each person's first wish when we are allowed to go outside again. Margot and Mr. Van Daan long more than anything for a hot bath filled to overflowing, and they want to stay in it for a half an hour. Mrs. Van Daan wants to go and eat cream cakes immediately. Dussel thinks of nothing but seeing Lotta, his wife. Mommy of her cup of coffee. Daddy is going to visit Mr. Vossen first. Peter, the town, and a cinema. Well, I should find it so blissful, I shouldn't know where to start. But most of all, I long for a home of our own, to be able to move freely and to have some help with my work again at last. In other words, school. Ela has offered to get us some fruit. It costs next to nothing. Grapes, 5 florins per kilo. Gooseberries, 70 florins per pound. 1 peach for 50 florins. 1 kilo melon for 1.5 florins. Sorry, the other one was half a florin. Sorry. Then you see in the newspaper every evening in bold letters, play fair, keep prices down. Yours, Anne. Okay, so this journal entry, I think it's a really great question. Like, what's your first thing that you're going to do when the ban is lifted and you can go kind of freely move as you want and have your freedom back? What's your first thing that you want to do, that you're not able to do right now? It tells you a lot about a person. What's your first instinct? So there's that. And then this last line, be fair, keep prices down. That reminds me of, be fair, 1 item per customer, of certain key items in the grocery store. So that was making me think of a lot of similarities here today. Okay, so the next journal entry I want to read is dated Monday, July 26, 1943. Dear Kitty, nothing but tumult and uproar yesterday. We are still very het up about it. You might really ask, does a day go by without some excitement? We had the first warning siren while we were at breakfast, but we don't give a hoot about that. It only means that the planes are crossing the coast. After breakfast, I went and lay down for an hour as I had a bad headache, and then I went downstairs. It was about 2 o'clock. Margot had finished her office work at 2:30. She'd not packed her things together when the sirens began to wail, so upstairs I went again with her. It was high time, for we had not been upstairs for 5 minutes when they began shooting hard. So much so that we went and stood in the passage. And yes, the house rumbled and shook, and down came the bombs. I clasped my escape bag close to me, more because I wanted to have something to hold than with the idea of escaping, because there's nowhere we can go. If ever we come to the extremity of fleeing from here, the street would be just as dangerous as an air raid. This one subsided after half an hour, but the activity in the house increased. Peter came down from his lookout post in the attic. Dussel was in the main office. Mrs. Van Daan felt safe in the private office. Mr. Van Daan had been watching from the loft, and we on the little landing dispersed ourselves too. I went upstairs to see, rising above the harbor, the columns of smoke Mr. Van Daan had told us about. Long before you could smell burning, and outside it looked as if a thick mist hung everywhere. Although such a big fire is not a pleasant sight, luckily for us it was all over, and we went about our respective tasks. That evening at dinner, another air raid alarm. It was a nice meal, but my hunger vanished simply at the sound of the alarm. Nothing happened, and 3/4 of an hour later it was all clear. The dishes were stacked, ready to be done, air raid warning, ack fire, an awful lot of planes. Oh dear me, twice in one day? That's too much, we all thought. But that didn't help at all. Once again the bombs rained down. The other side this time, in Sheeppool, according to the British. The planes dived and climbed. We heard the hum of their engines, and it was very gruesome. Each moment I thought, one's falling now. Here it comes. I can assure you that when I went to bed at 9 o'clock, I couldn't hold my legs still. I woke up at the stroke of 12. Planes. Dussel was undressing. I didn't let that put me off, and at the first shot, I leaped out of bed wide awake. 2 hours with Daddy, and still they kept coming. Then they ceased firing, and I was able to go to bed. I fell asleep at 2:30. 7 o'clock. I sat up in bed with a start. Mr. Van Daan was with Daddy. Burglars was my first thought. I've heard Mr. Van Daan say, everything. I thought that everything had been stolen too, but no, this time it was wonderful news, such as we've not heard for months, perhaps in all the war years. Mussolini has resigned. The King of Italy has taken over the government. We jumped for joy after the terrible day yesterday. At last something good again, and hope. Hope for it to end. Hope for peace. Kraler called in and told us that the Fokkers, the Fokkers had been badly damaged. Meanwhile, we had another air raid alarm with planes overhead and one more warning siren. I'm just about choked with alarms, very tired, and I don't feel a bit like work. But now the suspense over Italy will awaken the hope that it will end soon, perhaps even this year. Yours, Anne. Okay, so this journal entry has a lot of stuff going on in it. High action, fast paced, a lot of scary things happening at this particular moment, and then somehow, like, ironically, at the end of the entry, like, this kind of hope that even though it's been like a terrible day, I can't imagine multiple air raids and the house shaking and hearing the bombs and the planes all around me. I can't imagine what that would be like, but somehow it awakens hope in them that even though they've endured so much, that maybe this is almost over, this is almost the end. So I'm hopeful for them. I'm going to skip one journal entry now, and I'm going to move ahead to the last one that we're going to read together today. It's dated Tuesday, the 3rd of August, 1943. Dear Kitty, political news, excellent. In Italy, the fascist party has been banned. The people are fighting the fascists in many places. Even the army is actually taking part in the battle. Can a country like that wage war against England? We've just had a third air raid. I clenched my teeth together to make myself feel courageous. Mrs. Van Daan, who has always said, "A terrible end is better than no end at all," is the greatest coward of us all now. She was shaking like a leaf this morning and even burst into tears. When her husband, with whom she has just made it up after a week's squabbling, comforted her. The expression on her face alone almost made me feel sentimental. Mushi has proved that keeping cats has disadvantages as well as advantages. The whole house is full of fleas, and the plague gets worse every day. Mr. Kufius has scattered yellow powder in every nook and corner, but the fleas don't seem to mind a bit. It's making us all quite nervous. One keeps imagining an itch on one's arms, legs, and various parts of the body, which is why quite a lot of us are doing gymnastics, so as to be able to look at the back of our necks or legs while standing up. Now we're being paid back for not being more supple. We are too stiff to even turn our heads properly. We gave up real gymnastics long ago. Yours, Anne. So this journal entry, there's a couple of things I'm thinking about. I mean, one, there's really big, wide sweeping news, political news, about the fascists and the uprisings and things that are so big that it would be, my phone, sorry, it would be hard to think about, your role in any of it. Big political things. So, like, I can understand that there are all these big decrees and political leaders and world pundits, this worldwide organization against this COVID-19 outbreak that's sort of really beyond me. I follow politics, but I'm certainly no politician. It's very big. And then the end of the journal entry is something so just down home and mundane and like this everyday little thing that's also like kind of a torture to them. So if you've ever had a pet get fleas and then fleas in your house, I mean that's a whole huge thing. And so this, like, they're tormented on either side by this war they can't control and by these tiny little microscopic pests that they can't control either, and they're sort of like tossed around by both of it. And I'm kind of feeling that now too. I mean, these germs are something. I'm obsessively cleaning the counters with bleach, and kids, did you wash your hands, and don't touch your faces, and so there's like this like little beastie maybe in my home that I'm trying to fight on a daily basis and feeling tossed around by this thing I can't even really see. That's where I have to leave you for the day today. So I know that's a lot of stuff and I went pretty quickly, but I enjoyed my time with you. I hope you did too. I haven't started a journal yet. What are you waiting for? See you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.